Sure. So China is one of the fastest aging societies in the world. You hold a one-child policy for 35 years, you run out of 30-year-olds. I mean, that's how math works. The Chinese cannot interact economically with the rest of the world without a global security paradigm in place. They don't have a long-range navy. In fact, 90% of their firepower can't sail more than about 1,000 miles from the shore, so that doesn't get them to any major consumption clusters. They import pretty much all of the raw commodities that allow them to function. That's everything from corn on one side to oil on the other. So if they don't control the sea lanes, which they can't, they're completely dependent upon American security largesse just to exist. And if you look back at the long stretch of the history of the Han Chinese, 3,500 years, they've very, very rarely been unified. They're usually engaged in some sort of civil war or fighting off some sort of invasion. Neither of those goes well. In fact, their only period of peace and prosperity and unity in their entire history is under the American-led order since 1946, specifically since 1990. And if you look back to simply achieve political unity in the past, most of that period was under the Mongol occupation. This is not a place that holds together well. So they don't have the demography, they don't have the resources, they don't have the financial model, they don't have the physical access, they don't have the military capacity. This only works when someone from the outside forces everyone to be on the same side. That was the American-led global order, and that is now over. So the Chinese today, with this propaganda push on COVID, it's not to convince the world that the virus didn't come from China. No one believes that. It's to force a nationalist uprising in China itself so that people are willing to side with the Chinese Communist Party in a period of extreme political and economic stress, because that's what's coming for them. And if that doesn't work, China simply implodes. The trend that matters is their social control program. They've basically blocked off the Chinese internet from the rest of the world, and they're using it in other data management tools, some proto-AI stuff, in order to manage their population, so that whenever you do have, to be perfectly blunt, 3 people getting together in the same room to talk about the government knows and can use its army of censors and thugs to basically break it up. It's never been tried before. It's very Orwellian. We're now actually having a situation where the Chinese government is installing monitors in people's apartments if they're suspected of maybe having COVID in order to enforce quarantine. So, things that in this country are in the realm of fiction are now being implemented on a regular basis. Ethnic cleansing is being done this way, forced sterilizations, what they're doing with the Uyghurs out in Xinjiang, 1 million people in concentration camps. They're trying to take the best data management tools available and use it to force the unity of the Han identity as defined by the CCP. Can you imagine what Milosevic would have done with these technologies? And now we're seeing it done on a scale that's like, 2 orders of magnitude larger. That's the only way that this works. And even for that to work, the United States still has to keep providing global security and asking for nothing in return, because the only way they can keep that going is if they can continue to access resources and export markets. So the most likely future here where China holds is the US stops doing what it's doing. The lights go out in China because the power goes out because they can't import their materials anymore. The export markets disappear. And we drop into kind of a neo-Maoist tyranny where the standard of living in China just absolutely plummets and they just kind of become completely inward focused. In the few chapters of Chinese history where the center has held, it's kind of looked like that. They'll just be doing it with webcams as opposed to monitors on every corner. It's not a pretty picture. And almost all the other scenarios are worse. So I totally understand why they're willing to denigrate their own population to that degree to remain in control, because the alternative is implosion and chaos. And that's not hardly a friendly version at all. The Chinese are fairly astute students of their own history. They understand what's at stake here. We would have to have a significant change in technology that allows people over age 65 to continue to work and pay taxes coupled with a social change that forces them to continue to work and pay taxes. Most of our medical breakthroughs when it comes to people age 55 and over is about extending life, not extending working life. And that mindset has to change radically for us to go in a different direction here. That would be one way, but I think we all know that convincing our parents to use Skype has been a bit of a challenge these last couple of weeks. And trying to train people who thought they were going to retire in an entirely new industry, that's a reach. Well, you're going to have to break it up. There's a lot of different subregions, so let's just kind of go through them. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, those countries, the very rich countries of the Arab side of the Persian Gulf, they're involved in a global price war, primarily with the Russians, but not exclusively anymore. They are deliberately trying to drive oil prices as low as possible, negative if they can, and I think they can. And if they pull this off, I'd say even odds at present, it's going to take about 20 million barrels of crude production globally offline for years. And they will finally have what they wanted, which is a crude market where they can set the price and set the volume over the midterm. The May contract was in the United States, one specific spot at Cushing ran out of future leased storage. The storage wasn't actually full yet. Well, 4 to 6 weeks from now, it really will be full. And it won't just be at Cushing. What the Saudis are doing is any place they see a competitor, first and foremost the Russians, where they've got a pipeline that empties out into a populated area or a pipeline that hits a port, they are sending super tankers of crude to super saturate demand in those locations, specifically going after things like Rotterdam or Suez or Korea that are popular transshipment points for Russian crude, making sure that the tanks are completely full so the Russian crude has nowhere to go. They're doing this to a slightly less intense degree wherever all their other competitors are. So, for example, slightly less intense. There's 50 million barrels of crude from Saudi Arabia coming to the American Gulf Coast to try to knock shale out. That's nothing compared to what they're doing to Europe and Asia. And the goal is just to fill up all the tanks so that the producers have nowhere to sell their crude whatsoever. So they have to shut down their pipelines and they have to shut down their wells. Now, in a place like the United States, if you do this and the wells get shut in, they can be turned back on later. And from the point that you start drilling a shale well to the day you get first crude is only about 6 weeks. So US shale is going to take a hell of a hit. There's probably about 1 million barrels per day of production already offline. Probably another 2 million are going to happen before the end of the year. That's probably going to be front loaded. That's a 25% reduction in shale output. That's a big deal, but it'll be back in a couple of years. But if you shut in wells in Nigeria and Siberia, they're gone. It's going to be years, if not a decade, before you see those producing again. So the Saudis are taking a long haul here, taking a big economic hit on the front side. They can afford it. Across the Gulf, Iran, say what you will about the Trump administration, he won. Iran is no longer a net oil exporter. They're going to actually be importing over the summer, which is something they have not had to do in over a century. I don't think that this is going to cause regime change. Anytime you've got 100,000 people in your elite, it takes a really big stick to move that. But this is the end of Iran having cash, which means Iran in Lebanon and in Gaza and Iraq and Syria and all the other places that the Iranians have had their fingers, all of a sudden they don't have any money to back it up. They're massively overextended, which raises the opportunity for countries like Turkey or Saudi Arabia